India and China, since the ancient times, for more than 1.5 millennia, controlled over 60% of global wealth. So you can imagine, to maintain that proportion of economic activity, huge volumes of global trade used to flow like network of rivers along the numerous trade routes, like the Grand Silk Road. But then colonization hit like a rogue asteroid which shook everything up, leaving India devastated. Fast forward to the 21st century and guess what? That rivalry is back in action. These two Asian giants are clawing their way back to the days of ancient glory, trying to rebuild their own economic corridors for the future age. However, history is not all sunshine. These trade corridors, in any point of time, have been like the pressure valves, sparkling with ambition, power, vision, yet conflicts and chaos have always been the uninvited visitors, often messing up the normal course of events. In the year 2013, the Chinese president announced the formation of the Belt and Road Initiative. What was the Chinese dream? It was a giant web of trade routes crisscrossing continents, with China at its nerve center controlling everything. That is the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI, involving as many as 150 nations. Between 2013 and 2018, the World Bank estimated there were around 3,000 BRI investments, including energy projects, where China has invested amounting to as high as $1 trillion. But there is a catch. China wanted to be the sole power to control everything and reap absolute benefits. This is where the fault line started. We will see how one strategic misplacement in policy could put once in a millennium opportunity and trillions of dollars into the ditch. A decade later, in 2023, in the G20 summit held under the chair of India, it was announced that the new global economic corridor would be initiated by India, first of its kind in many hundreds of years. It would start from India, connecting the strategic locations in Middle East and stretch till the far regions of Europe. Imagine it like a superhighway linking India to Europe and US via the strategic points like Dubai, Saudi and Israel. That is the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, or the IMEC, the primary rival which emerged out of the new global order a decade later. So as we proceed, how is India's IMEC fundamentally different from the BRI, and how could IMEC be a success which BRI is still far from achieving its goal? What is the goal? The difference is not just in economics and operations, but also in the psychology of the initiative. China wanted BRI as a new imperial force designed to spread its wings to consolidate the Chinese Middle Kingdom concept. But what China did not anticipate was the unpredictable nature of global events, fueled by specific forces which caught China off guard and beyond its expectations. Any policy expert would have known beforehand that the economics behind the BRI was not feasible and justified beyond a critical point. But why did they take up a non-feasible project? Because there was the inertia in thoughts of being the hegemonic power. For China, there is the hyper-ambition where the application of power surpasses real economics. But in just a decade, no one perhaps anticipated the sudden rise of India, or the global economic slowdown, or the alteration in geoeconomics and the flow of money, or the complete chaos emerging out of the corona pandemic and consequent wars. The world was quite different, and it was predictable a decade back, now which is not. The goal of this video is not only to understand the long-standing effects of such mega trade corridors, which are if not repetitions but rhymes in history, but also to understand, point 1, how can we look for strategic insights and decisions which can alter the course of history. 2, how these global changes can affect the future. And 3, what can we learn from the events of such gigantic scales. Geopolitical and economic feasibility. India has closely observed China's attempts to expand the economic influence over the past decade, noting where China has faced significant challenges. China aims to dominate the Indian Ocean by influencing vulnerable nations like Maldives through coercion or financial carrots. In response, India is adopting a different approach, centered around enduring values and cooperation rooted in its civilizational identity. While China pursues dominance, India focuses at first on building tangible and intangible bridges, but backed by the strong hand of India's hard power if necessary. The strategic difference. Israel, that is a war-torn powerhouse and tech superpower in the Middle East. India is looking up to them as their secret weapon, which is not firepower. Think of it like this. Israel becomes India's guard in the western neighborhood, and in return, they get direct trade, data, and energy pipeline, both way wins. Now compare that to the China's tactics. They barge into a country, slap some debt traps, and boom, instant puppet regimes. Economic motive. China has the statistical might of being the second largest economy in the world. They can easily pour in a lot of cash in areas where they like. But it is also true that the Chinese aggression in the last decade have alienated many nations for its hegemonic behavior. Less countries trust China anymore, except for the new entrants. So why do the smaller nations steal for the Chinese traps? The reasons could be many, but one significant is those are run by weak group of people who are not only corrupt and incompetent, but also lack the demographic and the cultural wisdom to understand the danger ahead till disaster strikes. The best examples are Maldives and Sri Lanka. India, on the other hand, is calm and steady. The Indian approach: we are not an economy as big as China, we are not at the top of the supply chain yet, but at this point, we are playing the infinite game by building bridges. Some of the most fundamental and important principles based on which the success and failure of such grand global plans depend are: timing. China timed for a very rigid project, but for a very long incubation period. Therefore, making high risky plans for an indefinite time period is by itself an illogical step. A rigid, closed-ended plan, if goes for too long, often lands in the time where the conditions change. Looking back only a decade, no one would have anticipated such a rapidly changing geopolitical picture which is of the present day. Adaptability. All throughout, China has been extremely rigid in its format and execution. It has been building large infrastructure which are all inflexible and stagnant unless they produce high economic value. But in most of the cases, their economic output has been comparatively insignificant and counterproductive. It is highly doubtable how much of China's massive infrastructure has come to any genuine productive use. Execution. China's execution has been running late. It was based on the principle of a regional to global hegemony in a bipolar world through continuous creation of debt. But this has increased its own risk manifold. Just that it is China and seldom do any clear news come out of it, but there are speculations that many of the finances are in trouble. One such example is a crisis in real estate where the largest Chinese real estate giant Evergrande has gone bankrupt with an asset size of $300 billion. As we come nearer to the conclusion, what is India's course of action? If this is a chessboard, then India is not playing for a quick checkmate, but as a slow, strategic, and sustainable force in the global power game. In the following 4 steps, we will try to see how India can strategically crawl and silently reshape the global order. This is no overnight revolution, but a methodical ascent step by step, value by value. The functional goal. Immediate plan is to start exchange of commerce, data and energy. The development of an economic corridor is an open-ended continuous process where transformations keep happening. Hence, actualization of the transactions is essential. For that, we need a functional state of infrastructure. There will be deep water energy pipes, cables to transfer high value and high volume data and energy. We need to fasten the roads and port construction for making the touch points functional. The strategic goal. Slowly entering into the deep pockets of Middle East as a long-term value player. A functional economic corridor will facilitate the transaction of high volumes of data, energy and shipments to and fro from India to European hinterland via the Middle East. The next step would be to establish Indian deep pockets in the value points along the corridor. This strategic step is essential to gain Indian prominence as more of a global player than a regional aspirant. The defense goal. Fortify the portions of Middle East as India's historical western boundaries. Once the deep pockets in Middle East are well established, it would be in India's great geopolitical interest to fortify the positions not as an aggressor but as a value-providing nation partner. These high-value transactions would in return provide India access into the deeper corners of the region and passively build a defense buffer before the Indian mainland. The economic goal. Enter the European markets for businesses and supply chains of the coming decades. As the future is unpredictable and we do not know how exactly the trade relations would churn out in the coming years, whether China would lose the dominance or the whole trade maps would get a reset. But if an opportunity comes, India can position herself as one of the foremost business partners for the Western hinterland. Already, Europe is dependent on the refined oil shipments coming from the Indian refineries. But there are more openings left to be explored further when the capacity expands.